The book that I'm going to show you now began, I guess, many years ago, and it began with a film, I think. Well, it began even before a film. I won't bore you with the long history of how projects happen, but this began many years ago. I had a great assignment from Life magazine, which I got after being fired by Life. I came back, they brought me back, and I won't go into that story about being fired, but they brought me back, and I was really arrogant, and I said to them, I want no editors. So if there's editors in here, you can be pissed at me. I wanted no editors. And they said, how can you have no editor? And I said, well, we'll just blindfold me and I'll point at the map. And they laughed, and that's what they did. They blindfolded me and I pointed at the map, and I went to places like it's a dream assignment. And I ended up in Virgin, Utah, which is a town of like 90 Mormons, which they said that people won't talk to you. Of course, it was just the opposite. And I ended up in Auburn, Nebraska, where I met the town doctor. 10 minutes into the town, I met the town doctor, elderly man, met this old farmer, went out and did a story about aging in Auburn, Nebraska. And I couldn't tell his story completely on still, so we made a film. Clarence died after being brought to the local nursing home. He literally gave up. He had a heart condition. They brought him to the nursing home. And like a lot of people, he said, that's it, my life is over, and he died. A couple years later, I was going through Nebraska, and I stopped by because I loved Clarence. I knew him for a short time, but he was an amazingly open guy. He was a guy who said he'd let you into his house, and he'd sit in a chair and fall asleep. He trusted you so much in 2 minutes, you know. And I came to his house, and I looked in, and there was all the things left behind that he left behind when he passed away, and nobody touched it. And that began the project. And then I became, like any photography project, became obsessed by what you see. And I became obsessed with old houses. There's been many projects done on abandoned houses, so this is not a new project. But I thought they were very beautiful, and it took a lot of driving and a lot of searching in various places, but it was no people, and I wanted to get away from people, if you can tolerate that idea. And there was no people, and I had a great time in shooting this, and Janine came out with me a few times, no people. So I'll show you that this is actually right up the road from Clarence's house. They're in a thunderstorm. And the truth is, I mean, people say, how did you get that lightning bolt? I shot shitloads of film. I got one little scab of lightning came in there, and so I now know how to shoot lightning, if you need to know, but I didn't know how to do it then. Yeah. And this is the exterior of Clarence's house. And people ask if the dog is dead. No, the dog is very sick, actually, because they have a lot of ear mites and so forth, but the dog is alive. And this is the old, emptied out house. If you can see it, this is looking through the window. At first, I couldn't get into the house, and you have to push the door. You realize you don't want to violate a house. I made terms right away that I wouldn't break into anybody's house, and I thought the door was locked, but instead the doors was all swollen, you know, so I photographed through the window, and that's his daughter's doll. I found out later, and that's the bar of soap left behind in the sink. He killed a couple of insects. And this is the wall with the picture frames taken down. And I started going to other places many, many years ago. A lifetime ago, I was a social worker in Arkansas, and a kind of an activist in the Delta of Arkansas, where people were sharecroppers. And I went back to Arkansas to see if any of the houses were left, but there's almost none left. All the plantation sharecroppers' houses have all been torn down, both for historical shame reasons, partially because the farms are all corporate farms now. But I found a couple of houses left, and this is one of the houses that would have been a sharecropper's house. And that dog, thankfully, was very friendly. It was this huge yellow dog that came out and licked my lens. I was very worried about him. And I found this inside of this house, a woman's nightgown. But I never knew the people. Most of these places, I never knew the stories of them. You can kind of surmise the stories, maybe. This is the gas line from with the stove gone. An old abandoned church. This is the calendar hanging in the window, looking outside. And when I first went south all those years ago, I actually arrived the year that Martin Luther King was killed in Memphis. So seeing this old picture hanging in the empty church meant something to me. That picture hung in almost every black church in the area. I remember that same photograph. And now they got a bird's nest that's growing in it, you can see. There's not much text in this book. I wrote some notes in the end. I should explain that because Janine's here. I wrote a very extensive text for this, like 30 pages, and I gave it to Janine and my son to read. Was very proud of it, and they both said no. So it really pissed me off hugely, and as you can remember, and I said, "You got to be kidding," and she said, "No." And my son's worse than she is. She said, I try to convince him, you try to bribe your kid and convince him, and he just said no. So I dropped all the text and wrote a few pages in the back of the book because it was a visual experience, and I found out the more you said, in some ways, the more you took away, and this particular set of pictures. It's on a road out heading to an old house in Wyoming. All I remember about that day, I can tell you, and I didn't put it in the book, is it was one of those days where nothing was going well, and I had my head down, and then all of a sudden I lifted up and saw this incredible sky. So you get gifts as a photographer. And this is one of the few houses that I learned the story of because I went to an abandoned town, what we thought was an abandoned town, and it had a couple of people living in it. And they explained, as far as they could tell, that a young man went to World War II and never returned. And I said, I found all these beautiful shoes, and they were all tied together and really nice shoes, and what were they all doing there in the Sheets music? And they said the woman's son died in World War II, and then her husband probably passed away. So these were up in a dry attic for all those years. Another house in North Dakota that I couldn't get in there, so I shot it through the window. And I love the fact that even these empty out places, how carefully people try to make their houses beautiful. I find it very moving. Life in some of these places is very tough, particularly for the women, because as I kept thinking, even the men would confess that it's very lonely, because you're like 5 miles from your nearest neighbor, and the winters come in, you get snowbound, and the only thing you can do is try to kind of make your house look prettier. And I would find a lot of dolls abandoned from here and there. And I found a wedding dress in a very nice looking house, except that the doors were busted in, no one had burnt it down yet, and on the second floor was hanging this wedding dress. This one I know about how long it probably had been there because I found the glasses, the wedding glasses, and they were signed that the dress had been hanging there 12 years, so whatever happened to that family, they never came back for the dress. The town of Wallum, I think, Wallum, North Dakota. This is in a motel in Wyoming, and these were stuck to the bed, and I think someone had put them underneath the sheet, and driver's licenses and everything else. So someone left this stuff, in a hurry. So I think it probably was somebody, I'm only surmising, someone escaping from the law or whatever it is, left this stuff and was gone, because we found all kinds of insurance records were there, everything else. Another doll found in a garage. North Dakota. This is one of the few times if you know about crystal meth addiction in the United States, in rural areas, it's a pretty heavy-duty addiction, and this is a house where they were cooking crystal meth, and I found this little toy horse in the window of this house. These swallows I found can fly upstairs, but when they get into a room, they can't get down the stairs for whatever reason. whether it's an arrow, but you find a lot of dead swallows up in attics. And this looks, if you know United States, this looks like New Mexico with the beautiful blue walls and the candy boxes up. Mm. We actually checked this out. This cigarette butt had been in this ashtray for 50 years, and that car had been sitting there with the lipstick on there. You can make out great stories, can't you? What went on in that car 50 years ago? And the thing that broke my heart though, as I was fishing around the car, it was pitch black. It was the door. It was the same as this, and I opened the ashtray, and the ash broke off, and it killed me. I said, watching this huge ash just drop away. Yeah. Another lightning storm, this one in New Mexico. A North Dakota schoolhouse. The only thing that saved it from being totally taken apart was that the front part of the school had fallen down, so you couldn't get, you had to crawl in through all this debris to get into this room. I got to transfer it to your weather condition, but this is it gets about 40 degrees below zero Fahrenheit there. So this is one of those 40-degree below zero days. There's a lot of carcasses, a lot of poaching, deer poaching that's done in North Dakota. But this animal wasn't killed by poachers. It was killed by a dog. A huge dog attacked it. He was over the body, over the carcass when I came. Just a pretty little old house all by itself. Once in a while you find something alive. I used to find a lot of birds, a lot of owls in houses. These guys are alive, so they're not, there was two of them, you can't see them, but there's one behind the other are barn owls. And I left, they started getting really agitated that I was there. They make a wonderful sound when they get angry, but I didn't want them to get too upset. This again in the remains in North Dakota. I always think, I don't know if you know the work of the color photographer William Eggleston, the American photographer, and he has this very famous bicycle shot. And I said, there's what remains of his bicycle. Yeah. Tricycle, I should say, I'm sorry. And that's the photographs from the Blue Room.